by definition, continuing to rely on those things, and we start doing it in like first grade. We start giving these standardized tests as early as the first grade, and then we use them as these sort of gatekeeping mechanisms at every additional level, certainly for college and grad school and med school and law school, right? And so when you do that year after year after year, you're clearly trying to produce inequality. It's not an accident. In other words, if you understand inequality, to understand it, you have to understand it not as a glitch in the app, known as American education, but it is a feature of the app known as American education. There's no patch coming, there's no update coming, right? You're going to have to actually retool the hardware as well as the software if you're going to get equity, because it's very obvious that it wasn't intended to produce those outcomes. Which means that if inequality is sort of the point of American education at present, then anyone who wants to produce equality or equity in that system is going to have to view their job as teachers, as administrators, as counselors, as staff members at a college or in a high school or in a middle school or whatever it is. You're going to have to conceptualize your jobs as revolutionaries, right? Because you're either collaborating with that system as it is, or you're trying to overturn that system as it is. There's really no middle ground. You're either a revolutionary or you're a prison guard, right? In a real formal sense. You're either a revolutionary or you're a prison guard. And if you're not happy being a prison guard, you have to choose to be a revolutionary. And if you're not comfortable with that, you need to find another hobby. So then the question is, how do we do it? How do we actually move from the maintenance of inequity to a system of greater, if not perfect, at least greater equity? Well, first let's talk about how we don't do it. Because one of the things you notice when you go around the country, as I have for 25 years talking about racism and education among other institutions, is you notice that there is a tendency among even really well-intended school systems and really well-intended principals and teachers and college professors and counselors, both like guidance counselors and career counselors and health professionals on college campuses, and just everybody. There's a lot of really good intentions among those folks, right? Because again, like I said, you don't get into the field of education for the money or the prestige. You're doing it because you want to help in some way move the society forward. But there's still this overly individualistic mentality that we tend to have. We tend to look at education as being about one thing above all else. It's about the development of skills, individual accomplishment, and the mastering of certain skills, because it's about helping individuals get good jobs, make enough money to support themselves. The purpose of education, in other words, we have increasingly said in this country, is about professional outcomes. Why do you go to college? I go to college so I can get a good job, make more money, support my family. I get that. That's important, right? You need to be able to get a job, have a career, support your family, pay your bills. All that's important. But that kind of mentality as to what education is for is very different than the way it used to be understood. Even in the last 45 years or so. In the early 1970s, if you ask most students what's the primary reason to go to college, they said it was to develop a meaningful philosophy of life. Now, I realize that sounds a bit esoteric, and it's sort of privilege, right, to just be able to sit around and contemplate the meaning of life, right? But the reality is there was a reason people could do that. Then, number one, school was a lot cheaper, right? So I get it. Like, you're going into debt for education now. You can't just sit around thinking about stuff, right? You got to figure out how to do something. I get it. I understand it. But if we've gone from this sort of large, big picture theme of developing a philosophy of life to just getting a job, I'm not sure that getting a job is any better as an answer than this esoteric developing a philosophy of life answer. They're both sort of bad answers, right? The one is a little bit pie in the sky and esoteric. The other is just so incredibly limited, right? Is that really why we go to school? Just so we can get a job? Because here's the thing, why would you come to a facility to get an education if the only purpose was a job? You could do that online. You can get a certification, do something online. You have to show up, right? Why would you come to a college and take a range of classes? Why wouldn't you just go to trade school and just focus in on your particular trade? And by the way, there's nothing wrong with doing that. Absolutely nothing wrong with trade school. Absolutely nothing wrong with online learning. But to the extent you are coming to a college and taking a multitude of classes across multiple disciplines, clearly it ain't just about that. Right? It's about building community. It's about creating community and maintaining community. And it's about teaching people not just what to think about their chosen, path, perhaps, which you might not even know what that is when you show up, right? You might figure that out while you're here. But it's not just about teaching you about a particular subject and telling you what to think. It's about helping you learn how to think, right? To think critically and to assess the world around you so that you can act to change that world and to better that world. In other words, the purpose of education is inherently social, not just individual. And yet oftentimes, when I talk to teachers, they sort of forget that. And I've heard many, many teachers with really good intentions who will say things like, and they'll say this to working class young people, and young people of color disproportionately, but even working class white folks, right, who live maybe in sort of struggling economic situations. They'll say things like, you know, that you got to stay in school and get an education so you can get out of here, so you can make something of yourself, so you can escape, right? And they think they're doing these young people a favor, but think about what that teacher just said, please. Right? If a teacher tells a young person, either a child or a young adult, that the purpose of school is so they can escape where they're from, what you've just told that person, and it gets said all the time, what you've just told them is everything you come from is broken. Everything you come from is bad. Everybody that you think loves you is no count, and you should give them no consideration. You should try and get as far away from them as you can. The purpose of schooling is not so you can stick around and liberate your community, not so you can improve the community and uplift everyone in it, not to give back to that community, but to run away from it as fast as you can and make something of yourself. That is a horrible message to send to anyone, because it casts that person as this rugged individual with no connectivity, no relationships, no bigger purpose. Right? That's not exactly the way to create a cohesive society and a pluralistic democracy where everybody's just thinking about themselves and out for themselves and just, if I can just get mine, everything's okay. And what's really ironic is that even at the worst moments of segregation, right, there was a better philosophy of schooling than that among those who were segregated and marginalized. That's the irony. I'm not romanticizing segregation, but under the days of segregation, I can tell you this, black families knew their teachers loved them, and that the guidance counselors loved them, and that the principals loved them. You know how I know? Because those folks lived in the same community. And they would drop by and talk to the parents, not just when the kid did something wrong, but even when the kid did something right. Those connections were tight and they were real. Right? And those teachers knew they couldn't just tell kids the purpose of school is so you can get a good job and make a lot of money, because under segregation that wasn't even an option. Right? So they had to have a different theory, and that theory was about collective uplift. We're doing this for us. We're doing this to uplift the entire community. You have to do well so that you can defeat this system which is aimed like a dagger at your heart. That was the message that was given. Teresa Perry, who's an educational theorist, brilliant educational thinker, talks about this as the notion of freedom for literacy and literacy for freedom, right? The idea that you got to be free in order to have a chance to get educated, but you got to be educated to truly be free. Education has a collective purpose, and we don't teach that purpose. Once we got rid of segregation, which we needed to do, we integrated the bodies and the buildings, but we didn't integrate the philosophies. We didn't bring over the black philosophy of schooling, right, which had been a philosophy of collective uplift, and mix that with these newly mixed schools. We just put everybody in the schools and said the purpose is to move ahead as an individual, right? And we reinforce that idea every day in school, right? Keep your eyes on your own paper, don't work together, that's cheating. First few years we let kids work together. We think it's cute when they're in like second grade. Right? First grade, second grade, third grade, oh, you're all working together, isn't that nice? Oh, that's great. And then by like fourth or fifth grade, it's just like stare straight ahead, raise your hand, don't talk until you're, asked a question, and you don't look at somebody else's work, you don't work together, right? It's all about your individual assessment. Got parents putting stickers on their car, my kid's an honor student, give a damn. Right? It's all about, parents trying to get their kids into the best preschool when they're like, they're not even pregnant yet. Right? They're getting people on lists for preschool. Well, I'm going to get pregnant at some point. I might want to sign them up. This actually happens, right? So we've gotten this very individualistic mentality that I think is not the way we're going to get to equity, because it takes the whole collective aspect of schooling out of the equation, right? So we have to go back to some of these philosophies that were so important to those who were struggling for equity under systems of formal oppression like segregation. We've lost the learning that existed back then and the philosophy that existed back then. We don't want to go back to those days, but we do need to go back and capture some of that thinking, right? About what the purpose of schooling really is. In addition to that, young people need something that can inspire them to learn. Right? The idea that some teachers have, I gather, is that whoever comes in their class, they can just teach in the same way they've always taught everybody. Right? So I'm teaching the same stuff I've always taught, the same way I've always taught it. A lot of times people get in professional positions and they just don't ever up their game because they don't have to, right? Like they've just been doing it. And it's not because they don't want to up their game, it's just they figure they don't really have to do it. Nobody's really asking them to do it. Nobody's really expecting it of them. I had a professor in college who was like this. I was at Tulane in New Orleans, and it was freshman year, second semester, so spring of '87. And I was in an international relations class. This professor had been teaching there a long time. And we were doing a lesson that day about the Cuban Missile Crisis, which had been 25 years earlier in 1962. So he walks into the class, he takes out his briefcase, he pulls his notes out, and they're like yellow stained with like cigarette smoke, because he chain smoked, right? Stained with coffee stains, which I think are not recent stains, by the way. I feel confident that he wrote these notes like during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Right? I have a feeling this paper is 25 years old, and those cigarettes were smoked a quarter century before as he wrote these notes down, and he's just been teaching the same crap for 25 years, right? Because he had tenure, he didn't have to really up his game, nobody was really checking in on him, he figured I can reach everybody with the same stale-ass lecture that I gave in 1963, and 64, and 65, and 75, and 85, right? And probably every year until he retired a few years after I had the class with him, right? So we've got to figure out ways to reach everyone, and sometimes that means we have to understand, particularly when it comes to creating equity, that it's not going to work for everyone the same way that it works for other people, right? And sometimes we have to understand the very specific needs of those who are not achieving at the same level, not receiving the same resources, not having the same experience. But they need something more to inspire them. It's not enough to just tell them, oh, you go to school and you can get a good job and make better money. I was talking to a teacher several years ago who tried that approach, that the purpose of school was so you could get a good job. And, people who are poor and working class just don't even believe that. They don't believe that it's necessarily going to get, because they know people every day that are pretty smart in their community but don't make any money. And we all know there's a lot of really stupid people making a lot of money, right? Money doesn't have anything to do with intelligence per se, right? And how much you're earning. So this teacher was trying this out. She was doing the normal shtick about oh, if you stay in high school, you make $1 million more over the course of your life, and if you drop out, and if you go to college, you make $1 million more over the course of your life, and if you just go to high school. And I guess all that stuff is true for what it's worth, right? But then this young man in the back of the room raised his hand, young black man. He asked the teacher, who was a white woman, said, Miss Smith, or whatever her name is, let me ask you a question. You say I should stay in school because I make more money, right? Yes, that's right. $1 million more. Okay. You went to college, right? Why, yes. Yeah. Matter of fact, I did. I did go to college. He goes, you even went to graduate school, didn't you, Miss Smith? Yes. As a matter of fact, I did go to graduate school. I have a master's degree. Yes, I did. And he said, yeah. So how much do you make? She never brought the subject up again. Because it was obvious in that moment that you can have a very high-level academic degree and not necessarily make a lot of money, because your earnings aren't necessarily tied to that. Your earnings are tied to what the society decides to value. Right? So the society decides to value selling stock, right, to rich people. And the society decides to value working in a weapons factory making weapons that can be used either by our own country or other countries. Right? Our society values certain processes that poison the planet and poison the water and poison the air and the soil. It doesn't really value those guys that pick up my garbage every Wednesday, though. They make $19,500 a year plus pretty lousy benefits. But really, which job is more important, right? Let's be honest, which job is more important? Because if those guys in my neighborhood don't pick up the garbage for 6 weeks, right, we have bubonic plague in my neighborhood. We got people dropping dead if those guys don't come to work, right? On the other hand, the dude that sells stock that lives 4 or 5 houses down, he could not show up for the next 6 months. Nobody's even going to know. Right? That stock is going to get sold by somebody. It's going to get traded by somebody. He doesn't have to go. The world's not going to come to an end. Those dudes that make $19,500 decide they're going on strike. We are screwed. I wouldn't even know where to take my own garbage. See, I got a college degree. I'm supposed to be real smart and all. I don't know where the garbage goes. If they don't show up, I'm my wife would be like, Do something. Do what? Do what? I don't know where the landfill is. I don't know where the recycle place is. We're just going to stay here and die. That's what's going to happen. We're going to stay here. We're going to get sick. The kids are going to die. Because I don't know where the garbage goes, right? So society tells us that we need to stay in school so we can make money, but unless you are going to do something that the society says is important, like if you want to be a teacher, you ain't going to make a lot of money. You want to be a social worker, you want to actually help people, you want to be a nurse, right? You want to work with in elder care, very important job, one of the most important jobs you could have. You're not going to make good money doing that. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. Doesn't mean it's not rewarding. It can be incredibly rewarding, but don't be thinking about it as a financial thing. Thinking about it as a collective social thing, as about the benefit that comes from that. But we don't have that mentality, and that's what young people are going to need in order for us to get equity, because they know something is wrong. And what's interesting is, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier about inequity being intentional. It's very obvious that it is, because whenever we do come up with some ideas to try to reduce the inequality, and the minute it starts to actually work, we get rid of those ideas. So let me give you a couple of examples. And they make 2 points at once. Number one, the point that inequality is by design, but number two, that there are ways to inspire young people